Women and Gender in 17th Century England. The early modern period is remarkable, not just for its women, but for the way in which men saw women. This is an age in which men's roles are being challenged by women. Women as martyrs, women as monarchs, women as writers, and so on. And this gives rise to male anxiety. The playwright Ben Jonson, for example, complains of ladies that live from their husbands and cry down or up what they like or dislike in a brain or a fashion with most masculine or rather hermaphroditical authority, showing his discomfort at women who do not behave in a womanly way. An anonymous pamphlet of 1620, entitled The Womanish Man, expresses the spirit of women's assertion of identity and rights. We are as free-born as men, have as free election and as free spirits. We are compounded of like parts, and may with like liberty make benefit of our creations. The fear that women were usurping men's roles is reflected in the fact that female transvestitism, women dressing in men's clothes, was regarded as quite a serious transgression, and offenders were liable to be punished, whereas male transvestitism, men dressing in women's clothes, was generally regarded as harmless. The anxiety that coloured men's view of women had a more sinister side, too. When Shakespeare's Lady Macbeth calls on the spirits to "unsex me here," and "come to my woman's breasts and take my milk for gall," she opens up her woman's heart to cruelty and evil, aligning herself with the witches who have prophesied that her husband will become king. The 17th century in England, even more than the 16th, was a time of persecution of women as witches, and hundreds were tortured and put to death in the belief that they were agents of the devil. The fear, hatred, and suspicion with which women were commonly regarded in the early modern period is partly a result of the Christian culture of European society. According to the Bible, it was a woman, Eve, who first accepted the apple from the serpent and gave it to Adam in the Garden of Eden. Women were seen as being more fleshly, more driven by physical desire than men. As one male writer of the late 16th century puts it, "The common scum of women are so proud, so foolish, so shrewish, so imperious over their husbands, and for enticements of the flesh, and proneness to lust, of such an untamed and unbridled concupiscence, that they may well be tired, but never satisfied with the act of venery." The perceived decline of the medieval traditions of courtly love was also an aspect of early modern gender relations. In the heroic past, the man supposedly knelt before his lady in a symbolic reversal of the male hegemony of the age, and she gracefully accepted him, after which the normal pattern of male domination and female submission would reassert itself. Whether the medieval period was really like that is a different question. What matters is that both men and women looked back in early modern times to an age when, supposedly, men were men and women were women. However, separating them from that ideal age was the 16th century, with its powerful queens and heroic female religious martyrs. 17th century women had some inspiring role models, and men found themselves being compared unfavourably to female role models, as well as having their assumptions of male supremacy challenged. Later in the century, Samuel Butler, like Johnson, paints a picture of women asserting themselves, taking over from men. When o'er the breaches greedy women fight to extend their vast dominion, when wives their sexes shift like hares, and ride their husbands like nightmares. For when men by their wives are cowed, their horns, of course, are understood. As this passage shows, sexual insecurity was a significant component of early modern male anxiety. What if, after going down on bended knee to one's sweetheart, she should after all refuse and even mock her suitor? The late 17th century poet Mary Barker paints exactly such a picture of a rejected lover. O cruel nymph, why dost thou thus delight to torture me? Why thus my sufferings slight? My mournful songs neglected are by thee. Thou art regardless of my verse and me. Thou canst behold with an unpitying eye my sorrows, and art pleased to see me die. The way that Barker, as a woman, takes on the narrative voice of the slighted male lover highlights this sense of female empowerment in gender relations. There are numerous examples of women showing this kind of awareness in 17th century women's literature, perhaps the most striking of all being Aphra Behn, whose extraordinarily explicit poem The Disappointment describes in intimate detail a man's failure to maintain an erection while making love. He cursed his birth, his fate, his stars, but more the shepherdess's charms, whose soft bewitching influence had damned him to the hell of impotence. The sexual frankness of many of the writings of 17th century women is all the more remarkable when one considers that in the previous century, women, if they wrote at all, mostly wrote on religious subjects. The Countess of Montgomery's Urania, published in 1621, a long prose romance with numerous erotic passages, was written by Mary Roth, niece of Mary Sidney, who is best known for the verse translations of the Psalms, which she composed together with her brother Philip. Surprisingly, there appears to have been comparatively little public reaction to the overtly sexual content of works like Urania. It was actually withdrawn from publication, but only because it was claimed to paint a libelous picture of a well-known politician and neighbour of Roth's, not because it was considered immoral. In one of the most famous passages from Urania, the hero Parselius and his sweetheart Pamphylia come across a villain tormenting his wife, Limena. Leading her to a pillar which stood on the sand, he tied her to it by the hair, which was of great length and sun-like brightness. Then pulled he off a mantle which she wore, leaving her from the girdle upwards, all naked. Her soft, dainty white hands he fastened behind her with a cord about both wrists, in manner of a cross, as testimony of her cruellest martyrdom. When she was thus miserably bound to his unmerciful liking, with whips he was about to torment her. Of course, they rescue her from her cruel husband, but she then gives graphic details of all his other acts. Then did he command me to go with him, to my death, I hoped, when he brought me into a great wood, in the midst whereof he made a fire. Then he made me undress myself, which willingly and readily I did. When I had put off all my apparel, but one little petticoat, he opened my breast, and gave me many wounds, the marks he may here yet discern. letting the mantle fall again a little lower to show the cruel remembrance of his cruelty. Descriptions like these have given rise to much debate among feminist critics. Here we have the first major work of prose fiction written in English by a woman, and it's filled with scenes of erotic violence by men against women. However, Urania contains similarly erotic descriptions in which men are captivated and abused by women. There are homosexual scenes, there are proud huntresses, women glorying in the spectacle of men duelling and killing each other, and so on.
Rather than seeing it merely as a pandering to the male gaze, it's probably more appropriate to see Urania as an assertion and a celebration of unabashed female sexuality, which I'm prepared to bet is something that even many scholars of English literature would not have expected to find in a work written by a woman in the 17th century. But the most extraordinary woman writer of the 17th century is undoubtedly Aphra Behn. There's far too much to be said about her for me to say it all here, and I'll come back to her in future podcasts. For now, though, I'll limit myself to a discussion of love letters between a nobleman and his sister, written in 3 parts from 1684 to 1687. The first part of the novel was published anonymously, while parts 2 and 3 give the author merely as A.B. And while it's usually attributed to Behn, not all scholars are convinced that she is, in fact, the author. If you're interested in following that up, Leah Orr's 2013 paper, Attribution Problems in the Fiction of Aphra Behn, and Kate Osment's From Recovery to Restoration, Aphra Behn and Feminist Bibliography, 2018, make the case for doubting that it is her work. Whether Behn was the author or not, Love Letters Between a Nobleman and His Sister is a highly significant piece of work. As well as being the first epistolary novel in English, it is remarkable for the way in which it challenges all kinds of religious and social taboos. For example, challenging the idea that marriages, even unhappy ones, are made in heaven, the author has the female protagonist proclaim, "Curse on your nonsense, you imposing gown men! Curse on your holy cant! You may as well call rapes and murders, treason and robbery, the acts of heaven. Because heaven suffers them to be committed, is it heaven's pleasure, therefore, heaven's decree? A trick, a wise device of priests, no more, to make the nauseated, tired-out pair drag on the careful business of life, drudge for the dull-got family with greater satisfaction, because they're taught to think marriage was made in heaven." That's pretty groundbreaking for the 17th century. And while it may perhaps have been written by a man, that mention of rape makes it, to my mind, far more likely to have been the work of a woman. And there were few other women, apart from Behn, who wielded a pen of such sharp, direct asperity. Anyway, here's the basic plot.
A young man, Philander, is married to a woman whom he does not love. Rather, he loves his wife's sister, Sylvia. Sylvia has told him he must keep away from her, but he is head over heels in love and cannot restrain himself. So he writes a letter to Sylvia, begging her to allow their love to grow. It's a bit long, perhaps, but I think it's worth quoting it in full, so here goes. To Sylvia. Though I parted from you, resolved to obey your impossible commands, yet know, O charming Sylvia, that after 1,000 conflicts between love and honour, I found the god, too mighty for the idol, reign absolute monarch in my soul, and soon banished that tyrant thence. That cruel counsellor, that would suggest to you 1,000 fond arguments to hinder my noble pursuit, Sylvia came in view, her irresistible idea, with all the charms of blooming youth, with all the attractions of heavenly beauty, loose, wanton, gay, all flowing her bright hair and languishing her lovely eyes, her dress
all negligent as when I saw her last,
discovering 1,000 ravishing graces, round, white, small breasts, delicate neck and rising bosom, heaved with sighs she would in vain conceal, and all besides that nicest fancy can imagine surprising. Oh, I dare not think on, lest my desires grow mad and raving. Let it suffice, O adorable Sylvia. I think and know enough to justify that flame in me which our weak alliance of brother and sister has rendered so criminal. But he that adores Sylvia should do it at an uncommon rate.
'Tis not enough to sacrifice a single heart, to give you a simple passion. Your beauty should, like itself, produce wondrous effects.
It should force all obligations, all laws, all ties, even of nature's self. You, my lovely maid, were not born to be obtained by the dull methods of ordinary loving, and 'tis in vain to prescribe me measures, and much more in vain to urge the nearness of our relation. What kin, my charming Sylvia, are you to me? No ties of blood forbid my passion? And what's a ceremony imposed on man by custom? What is it to my divine Sylvia that the priest took my hand and gave it to your sister? What alliance can that create? Why should a trick devised by the wary old only to make provision for posterity tie me to an eternal slavery? No, no, my charming maid, 'tis nonsense all. Let us, born for mightier joys, scorn the dull beaten road, but let us love like the first race of men nearest allied to God. Promiscuously they loved, and possessed, father and daughter, brother and sister met, and reaped the joys of love without control, and counted it religious coupling, and 'twas encouraged too by heaven itself. Therefore start not, too nice and lovely maid, at shadows of things that can but frighten fools. Put me not off with these delays. Rather say you dissembled love all this while, than now 'tis born to die again with a poor fright of nonsense, a fit of honour, a phantom imaginary, and no more. No, no, represent me to your soul more favourably. Think you see me languishing at your feet, breathing out my last in sighs and kind reproaches on the pitiless Sylvia. Reflect, when I am dead, which will be the more afflicting object? The ghost, as you are pleased to call it, of your murdered honour, or the pale and bleeding one of the lost Philander? There are several points of interest here. The first is that after 1,000 conflicts between love and honour, Philander chooses the god, that is, love, rather than the tyrannic idol, that is to say, honour. According to the social code of the time, one's love should never bring dishonour, either to the man or to his lover. He goes on to describe his lover as loose and wanton, words which suggest sexual immorality, but Philander uses them as terms of praise, not of censure, and his description of her ravishing graces, round, white, small breasts, delicate neck and rising bosom, heaved with sighs, is unabashedly sensual. Philander goes on to speak of their weak alliance of brother and sister, noting that no ties of blood forbid my passion,
and making light of the fact that he's married to Sylvia's sister. What alliance could that create?
By dismissing his wedding vows, he breaks one of the fundamental taboos of early modern society. Marriages were considered to be according to the will of God. They twain shall be one flesh, so then they are no more twain, but one flesh. What therefore God hath joined together, let not man put asunder, as the Gospel according to St. Mark has it. Even more daringly, he cites biblical authority for the idea that even though their love is not incestuous, it would not be sinful anyway, since after creating Adam and Eve, their children and grandchildren were encouraged by heaven itself to lie together as father and daughter, brother and sister, in order to populate the world. The conventional explanation would be that God had made a special allowance in those particular circumstances, but once the world was peopled, the laws against sleeping with family members were absolute. Again, Philander defies religious principles, social conventions, and accepted moral standards. Against his passion for Sylvia, none of these matter. Philander also tells Sylvia she should be won by a love so strong it can force all obligations, all laws, all ties, even of nature's self, concluding she was not born to be obtained by the dull methods of ordinary loving. This portrayal of love as an all-consuming passion that overrides all other considerations is the central feature of the novel. Philander's uncommon love that sets aside all conventions and takes pleasure in the woman's physical beauty and her uninhibited sexuality is a challenge to everything the early modern world stands for. And it is written,
or probably written,
by a woman. What message is she communicating to her readers? That this is how a woman wants to be loved? Perhaps. Sylvia, in her reply, tells Philander, "With what regret I made you promise to prefer my honour before your love," making it clear that she loves him in return, and at the end of the first part they determine to elope together to Holland. In the end, though, their love is ill-starred. They're forced to separate, and first Philander and then Sylvia embark on affairs with other lovers. By the end of the third part, Sylvia is a prostitute. Is this Ben giving the tale a moral to appease her conservative readers?
Mary Roth's Urania was withdrawn from publication after she was accused of satirizing real-life individuals in it. Love Letters Between a Nobleman and His Sister, too, is partly based on the real-life love affair between the politician Lord Grey, the first Earl of Tankerville, and Henrietta Berkeley, his wife's sister. Ford Grey was taken to court by Henrietta's father, and Henrietta was called before the court, where the Lord Chief Justice, Sir Francis Pemberton, told her, "You have injured your own reputation and prostituted both your body and your honour," as recorded in 1776 in the complete collection of state trials and proceedings for high treason and other crimes and misdemeanours. Henrietta was imprisoned for 3 days, while Grey, despite being censored, was not sentenced to any punishment. In the novel, too, Philander pays no penalty for his loose behaviour, and Grey's elopement and shifting political fortunes are loosely mirrored. A novel alluding to a scandal involving a public figure of Grey's prominence was a risky enterprise, and whether or not Aphra Behn was the author, and I'm inclined to think she was, there were good reasons for remaining anonymous.
What Mary Roth and Aphra Behn and other women writers achieved in the 17th century should not be underestimated. English society continued to be male-dominated, and most women were dependent on men, both economically and in the eyes of the law. But by taking up the pen, women demonstrated that the power of the word was not only in the hands of men. As Abraham Cowley indicates in his dedicatory verses prefaced to the poems of Catherine Phillips, the autonomous female author is a challenge to male assumptions of superiority. We allowed your beauty, and we did submit to all the tyrannies of it. Ah, cruel sex, will you depose us too in wit?
To find out more about 17th century women, see the section on women writers living between 1601 and 1700 on the University of Pennsylvania's web pages, a celebration of women writers. The Women in Book History Bibliography website, maintained by the University of Illinois, is also an excellent resource. You have been listening to Anno Sensei. If you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe to my channel or join as a channel member.